Welcome, everyone, this early morning on the Pacific Coast and 8 a.m. on the East Coast. Welcome all around the world to Wild Futures, Immersive Art in the 2020s and Beyond. We've got a fantastic panel for you today, so fasten your seatbelts and stay tuned. I'd like to start off by having everyone on our panel give an introduction of themselves and their practice. And I will wrap up that section and then move on to the first question. So I'll start with Sophia. Sophia Crespo, could you please tell us an introduction on yourself, your background, and your practice?
Yeah. Hi, Drew, and hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here today. So I'm Sophia Crespo. I'm a generative artist, and I work as part of my studio, Entangled Others, and also as an independent artist around the topic of nature and new technologies. So how we can use new technologies to actually open up a conversation about connecting to the natural world. And yeah, we hope to use these tools to bring like criticality, to talk about machine learning bias, and to talk about how we relate, how we exist in relationship to others, such as the non-human or more than human, for instance. So.
Fantastic. And where are you joining us from this morning?
I'm in Slovenia right now doing an art residency. So I'm in Koper, by the coast.
Beautiful. And next we'll go to Miriam Achard. Could you tell us, Miriam, about your background, what brings you into this space, and a little bit about your practice, what you're currently working on?
Yes, hi. Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for the invitation. So I'm tuning in from Montreal. I'm Chief New Media Partnerships, PR, and Curator at FI in Montreal. FI is a multidisciplinary art center that's been open for 9 years now, and we are very much interested in works, exhibitions that are at the intersection between art and technology. My role at the center is really normally I'm traveling the world at least 1 week out of a month to go to different festivals, biennale, to discover new voices, to discover artists that I'm able to showcase in Montreal in our exhibitions. And I can't wait. You can imagine that I can't wait to travel again, hopefully earlier this fall, to be able to see the XR family back on the road.
Thank you, Miriam. That will be great when we can do a little bit more traveling and make some of these global connections together, both in real space as well as virtual space. And next to my friend Dylan Urquidi, tuning in from San Francisco, I believe. Oh, maybe Oakland. How are you doing, Dylan? And please tell us about your background and your practice and what you're working on right now.
Firstly, I just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to be on this part of this panel here. A bunch of talented individuals that are really shaping the future here. So it's an honor on my behalf just to be on this call. So my name is Dylan Urquidi. I'm by trade a designer and engineer at Unity Labs, the research division of Unity Technologies. I spend a lot of my time in BCI, EMG, EEG, and quite a bit of it emphasized on how that intersects with XR, so AR, VR, MR, and how it is that that can drive the tools that we can deliver to artists forward, but then also how it is that that intersects with technology, sociology, and the innovation paths that we need to be able to be on to be able to deliver the types of experiences that myself and the other engineers and designers I work with want to deliver. Outside of that, personally speaking, I'm a generative artist as well. I've been an artist my entire life in many, many mediums, and I'm in the process of being part of the fun frontier that I know that Sophia is a part of as well, and that we're working with elements like AI that don't really have proper user experiences for their tools. They if anything, you're usually popping up a console and you're doing quite a bit of it there. So I like to use the intersection of myself being a generative artist as well and my work at labs to be able to drive towards building the tools that are a bit more user-friendly, gosh forbid, going forward, and less just, people like Sophia and myself popping up the console and not really knowing what we're doing until about 4 hours after something's been trained. So it's a fun, exciting field, and pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Dylan and Sophia and Miriam. My name is Drew Kataoka. I'm an artist, technologist, and activist and CEO of Drew Kataoka Studios in Silicon Valley here in the Bay Area. We have a global footprint, shipping to art collectors all around the world with a presence in 30 countries. And we're working primarily in 3 genres, the ambrosias, the celestial lace, which are mirror polished stainless steel, and finally, technology artworks, working in VR, AR, EEG, art science collaborations like artwork that I sent to space for the first zero gravity art exhibit there. I'm also very passionate about the intersection of art, technology, and social impact. And just in 2021, year to date, I've raised over $500,000 for various social causes, including racial social justice, Stop Asian Hate, and the India COVID crisis. This year, I was the 8th Clubhouse icon, the first Asian American woman and the first visual artist on that platform to be in that role. And I'm very interested in the power of also social audio as an immersive technology to build and to create. And I have built a large art community on Clubhouse, actually the Art Club, which is the oldest and largest community of artists on the platform since its founding in 2020. So I'm really excited to be here with you today. I think we've got a really diverse panel from all around the world. I will just start off by asking a broad question. How do you see art and technology evolving together in the near future? I will start maybe with Dylan.
Question of questions. So we're on the precipice right now of modern, currently established mediums, and in my opinion, strongly, that will be evolving into mediums that we can barely anticipate. These mediums are going to evolve towards the technologies that will be enabling the artist to be able to create with them. So what are these? These are going to be the graduation of, say, BCI, getting closer to Neuralink, where initially data is going out of the brain, but eventually data will be coming into the brain at some point here. So we're on the cusp of turning the medium that is a passive medium in which, say, a visual artist creates a piece and the onlooker plays their participatory role in creating that piece with their mind. They're sharing that experience. They're the artist as well at that point, and turning it into a field in which the individual artist can actually sculpt conscious experiences that can be directly implanted into the human conscious experience of another. And the tools that we're going to need to be able to do this on the surface are creative tools, of course. We need to be able to have a design language in how it is that we create these types of environments, these types of creative environments here. I feel very fortunate that I get to play a very minute role in how this is edging towards this type of future. But what needs to come more importantly in this intersection of art and technology is, in my opinion, a strong social discourse in how it is that we're going to prepare ourselves to accept this type of artistic medium, how it is that we can be compassionate, be empathetic, and not have this type of medium cause unwilling pain or resistance to this type of medium for an individual that does want to participate in it. So there's almost a secondary language of an initiation or an introduction of sorts that needs to come in, that when we're actually sharing experiences that go beyond just being in the glasses or inside of an HMD in VR or AR, when we're literally able to share a conscious experience at some point, I think that's the language we need to begin defining is how do we make that socially acceptable, and how do we empower the artists that might either deeply inspire or potentially deeply offend someone else with such an experience. I think that's a very complex dialogue.
Yes, when we're talking about sculpting consciousness, that certainly has to be handled with care with a strong ethical and moral framework, and deep understanding of not only the technology, but the psychology, the humanity, the history, and then all the things you're talking about when you layer on the cross-cultural differences become really complex. If you have people interacting from Asia versus the Middle East versus an American point of view, and if we think about different gestures and different ways of interfacing, it becomes really complex. Maybe we can get into some of that, but I will ask Sophia if you want to tackle the same question that Dylan just answered. How do you see art and technology evolving together and in the near and far future?
Yeah, so I think this is a very interesting. Well, I remember speaking with Dylan about this, like the topic of interfaces, and in the future, how augmented creativity will be more and more intuitive as a process. And I think it's fascinating to speculate on how that might be. Already this AI boom or hype or whatever you want to call it has raised the question of where do we define creativity? And does creativity come from humans, or does it come from kind of collaboration? Personally, if you ask me, I still think that creativity is human, but it is still really important to talk about creating platforms that allow for empathy, also as Dylan mentioned. And for that reason, at least through my work, what I think is really important is to, if we talk about empathy, to also have a connection with the natural world, that with the life that exists in the planet as we build those technologies. Because really one of the main things that comes from like discrimination or how to put it, kind of like the distancing of me versus the other, is what causes this kind of technologies leaving others behind and not being accessible, not working for a specific group of people. So I think it's really important to build with empathy in mind, and inclusivity.
Thank you, Sophia. Miriam?
Well, I certainly embrace the fact that art and technology are getting, really closer together, and that's what I said earlier. That's what drives us in Montreal at the center in my curation. This encounter between art and technology is really exciting. And what I've seen in the last years, those very well established contemporary artists that are embracing VR, that are embracing AR, for instance, like Laurie Anderson or Olafo Eliasson or Marina Abramovic. The works by those artists I just named, we showed it at the center, and to see people reacting, to those beasts of those artists that are really now embracing the technology is really, really exciting. And they all say this is not a one-off. Laurie Anderson says directing a VR now is part of my practice. So for us to see this happening is really exciting. And I think we are at the beginning, and I just named 3, but I could name like 10, 20 artists that are really very well established in the contemporary art scene, but that are now embracing technology. It's exciting time.
Yes, Miriam, it is definitely. I think that the art, 50 years from now is really going to provide unmatched expression in visual and oral and in olfactory and haptic, and it's all going to be encapsulated in these super compelling virtual reality experiences for lovers of art wherever they're located. And we've already talked a little bit today about BCI, brain computer interface. We're going to have developments in that, in bandwidth, in artificial intelligence. And I think all of this is really going to create a new syncretic form of art like we've never seen. And it's going to be generating very lifelike experiences. And I also think this is going to really challenge our brains, rewire our brains, and have us rethink everything in our world, from the laws of physics and causality to the fundamentals of our own human existence. So we are in for a wild ride, and I guess that's why the title of this panel is called Wild Futures, Immersive Art in the 2020s and Beyond. The 2020s indeed do just seem like the beginning, and this is a very nascent space. And I think it's important to remember that we are the Cro-Magnons of this space. And I think others will look back with envy in a way to say, wow, those were really early times when that group of people had the opportunity to shape what was happening. And now all these things have become ossified into place, which is what we always see happen with large technology platforms. And I think it's very important at this stage what values we are imparting into this foundational layer. What areas of technology are reshaping the art landscape the most? What do you think, Dylan?
I am a big fan of Sophia's work, pardon my bias, but I think AI is the element that's really reshaping everything at this point. I have a bit of a bias. I love XR, as I mentioned there, and I think XR is definitely on the path to incur and impose quite a bit of evolution artistically in many mediums. But I think that AI jumping into the equation is actually it's not a separate thing from something like XR. It's a complement to it, because it basically infects everything, if you will, at this point here. And I think that it's very exciting to me for the artist that is willing to be a bit more hands-off, instead of needing to mill your own pigment for your paints, instead of having to paint each stroke or each pixel, being able to elevate yourself to the position of director or curator to be able to perform more wide-scale work. Again, if we're going to the point to where eventually, like right now, you can you can type in a phrase, and then you'll get an image generated from that phrase. Well, extend that out. That ends up being, I have a world I'd like to build. I will imagine that world. That world will be manifest to some degree by an AI and the tool set that accommodates that AI. I think that path of the individual turning more into the director, into the curator of conscious experiences via AIs facilitating that, I think that's absolutely amazing. I don't think we've ever, that's such a revolution. Again, that's like the master painter who eventually didn't have to mill or make their own pigment. Like that's the revolution. That's where the work kicks into high gear, the frequency of the work that's produced and the depth with which that artists can invest themselves into that work. So that to me is just extremely exciting.
Right. And I think it's important to remember that we've had artists all throughout history. Let's take a look at the Renaissance, that were working with very large workshops and teams, and not just, as you say, milling their own ink or doing every single thing themselves, but delegating quite large portions of the process to various processes, interacting with those processes in ways that blurred the lines, that still make it hard for the art history community and the art community at large to distinguish who exactly did what, how. And there's all this forensic analyzing to try to take it apart. And of course, that will continue to become more complex, but that's something that artists have always done. Sophia, what area of technology is reshaping the tech the art landscape the most?
I think generative art, but I am also really biased. I think creative coding in general has allowed artists to really explore new ways of creating. And I think that in the future, we're going to have like interfaces that are more like tailor-made to our needs. So it's not necessarily going to be like one interface for all, but we'll be more able to combine that with other, with our own feedback, so to say. I think there's also, I'm also very interested in like the future of sculpture and how we'll like explore new materials. That's very far from digital art, but I still think that it will be fascinating to design synthetic new materials that are like, for instance, like non-toxic or more biodegradable than some of the materials that we're using now to make art. And I'm excited about that. That future of being able to design molecules as an artist. So, yeah.
You're talking about sculpting and 3D printing with biological materials, with biodegradable materials. And you're talking about sculpture in the real world, right? Not only
yes.
In virtual space, although that's going to be becoming more and more interesting as well as we get more haptic sensations, becoming more and more tactile, where you're
definitely
pulling the clay and you feel the push and the pull. I think that's something that artists have been really wanting for, even when you think about the Wacom tablet. It's so slick, and it just doesn't have the pull of like charcoal across paper that has some kind of grit to it. And it's just like we're sliding around in our virtual space, whether it's 2D or 3D. So when we get some of that tactile feedback into the virtual sculpting, I think that is going to unleash a whole new chapter as well. And then maybe going back and forth and importing from the physical world into the virtual world will become very interesting. Miriam, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm a bit biased too, because XR is really what I'm works. The works that I'm looking for are all in XR. So for me, this is where it's the technology that is really exciting, and that I'm gonna, I'm passionate about. But like Dylan said, I think the intersection or the encounter between AI and XR will bring us to incredible experiences that we cannot even imagine yet. And this is what gets me the most excited. And what Dylan said, I could have said the same thing. This is where really I'm like this, and I'm ready to discover more and to I'm very passionate, as you can say, but AI and XR for me is really what I'm looking for, and the evolution I want to survey.
Thank you, Miriam. Dylan, I will start with you on this question. With respect to XR broadly, and I guess XR intertwined with AI, how do we safeguard creative expression in these spaces? There's lots of big players, there's lots of big platforms with big agendas. And there's a tendency for these platforms to quietly implement different policies and protocols that limit creative expression, all under the guise of kind of packaging something up as being creative. And I wondered, what dangers do you see? And how can we safeguard creative expression? We are artists on this call, and Miriam is a curator of art. I think this is a really important issue for us as a community that we are very vigilant about, perhaps even more vigilant than other communities that are thinking about these technologies for commercial purposes, for business purposes, and they have a different set of goals and ideas about this technology. What do you think?
Extremely important point. So we've, I'll be respectful and careful given my role at Labs at Unity, obviously, but we, especially XR artists, are creating in a field that is basically almost completely owned in a walled garden fashion. And it's becoming more of a walled garden behind the scenes, whether that's a certain company reneging on a promise and then saying that we're going to require a certain specific login that then we can obviously track what it is you do in relation to your social media posts, which I was fairly uncomfortable with and pulled my work off that particular platform. Or it's a company deciding that, we'd like to design our tooling so that we can mandate more homogeneous work because there's less offense that's given and then there's less of a legal burden on our end. So it saves us on our bottom line as well. So it's people get to do a little creation, but then they can't cross that line that we're not completely comfortable with in one specific area of the world where there's a certain set of social mores or whatever, and we'll design the logistics of our tooling and our legal foundation for that around that. So we're in this area to where as these walls close in, and yes, I understand that there are indie options here, but those, let's be very realistic. There are a few major players, and there'll be one or two very, very major players that jump into this field very soon. The indies are great for those that want to hack their way through and pretend that like Linux has great XR support or anything. And I'm a big Linux fan. I love open source. It's just not there. So we need to look at I think it's very important that we look at the politics behind these major players, behind the current major players and behind the upcoming major players. We understand how it is, we look at how it is that they're purporting why they're doing what they're doing today and extrapolate that into a scenario to where you're an artist in the device that they've created, in the operating system that they've created, using the UI and the user experience that they've designed, knowing that those decisions that go through that pipeline, and I directly interact with the research divisions of some of these companies, it still has to go through the bureaucratic chain. So those decisions that are informing the freedom that we get to have on this call, the freedom that the other artists will be able to have that are watching this video at some point in 2 days and 200 years, whatever. If we don't demand that artists are allowed to have their own space, their own creative space that should be consent-based. Again, it's hard not to offend anyone with anything. It's hard, it can be tough to inspire anyone with a piece of work, but we need to be able to have that creative space for the child who's creating an XR that hasn't been taught these social expectations. And they might create a piece just off the cuff and they haven't been inspired by anything socially, and it crosses that line, and then the operating system or the device erases their work in real time in front of them. Those are the scenarios that we need to be very, very careful about as we see some of the best tooling for XR.
Dylan, or just shadow bans it.
Well, that's a better scenario. Exactly. Is a shadow ban here. Is then they get to, just like video gaming right now, if you cheat in a game, they throw you into a different server. You never know you're playing with other cheaters. They're still monetizing you. The goal is obviously perpetual monetization in these areas here. So these are rights that I'm a big fan of saying we need to begin advocating for right now, because as these walls close, and as the best device to be able to produce a certain type of art begins to have that wall close, that's limiting what the artist can express. And on the surface, that's first where we don't want to offend other people, sort of like what decisions that social media might make. But then you get to extrapolate that downward to where if they individually target that based on other people, and more importantly, they can augment that content with AI, then eventually it might not even be your art that someone sees, hears, or experiences. That's one of my largest concerns, is that when you click yes on that EULA, you actually allow someone like Sophia or Drew's art to be something completely different when I perceive it. You get the social media thumbs up that I saw it. You don't know at all what I perceived. I want a transparent filter. If they're going to moderate what it is we create and what it is we display for users, there's got to be some means of being able to say this was or wasn't augmented. And we have to keep the freedom on the artist side here as these tools and the landscapes close down.
Sophia, do you want to give your thoughts on this question?
Yeah.
Safeguarding creativity and freedom of expression for artists as these big platforms start to really shape the space that we're in?
Yeah, so of course, I don't have the same amount of knowledge that Dylan has regarding this development platforms. But what I can say from my perspective is that I see artists are starting to talk more and more about platform capitalism, and I've actually been slowly entering that kind of listening and learning a bit more about it. And it suddenly struck me that we're being rewarded for playing a game, for playing a way somebody wants us to play, but we're not being rewarded for living life the way it is. So if for any reason, something happens in my life and say I cannot be active on Instagram, which is a huge curatorial platform for several artists, where we receive constant opportunities. I maybe miss a bunch of content. I maybe miss. I am maybe lower on the rank of being recommended to other people who could be relevant for me, and all those things we don't know about because they happen behind the wall. And I think it's really important for platforms to open to criticality from us, from creatives who are using their platform, to actually listen to us, give us a voice to talk about these issues, and to work with us,
Yeah, Sophia, and if I can just interject, I think you're speaking also about something which makes me think about this notion of the AI behind these platforms starting to know us better than we know ourselves.
Yeah.
Our habits, when we wake up, when we might be prone to log in, what our mood is based on the language and imagery that we're using, and what people we're associated with where in what locations, especially in a world where our own self-awareness is rapidly declining because people are so ADD and fractured, partly by all of the devices that are bombarding them. So we have kind of a lack of our own self-awareness, our own self-awareness going down, and then kind of the awareness of the AI behind these platforms increasing in terms of understanding how to play us, so to speak.
Definitely. And I think that it's, in a way, it's kind of dangerous to just let it continue escalating without intervening and saying something about it, or trying to make a change there.
So how do we do that? Miriam, what do you think? What are your thoughts on this issue?
Well, I think, when I say we, you guys are artists, I'm more on the curator side, but I think anyway we work hand in hand. But I think we have to advocate, as Dylan said, you use the word advocate, for rights, right now, before it's too late. And I think what Sophia said about criticism, it has to be constructive, and we have to bring it to them in a constructive way, so that they being the platforms, don't be offended, or we need to bring them, in our world. And I say it might be a bit of a wishful thinking, but if we don't try it, then it's gonna be too late, and we're gonna lose it. So advocate for the rights, constructive criticism, collaboration. Those are the words I would use, for that.
Thank you, Miriam. Let's talk about the NFT space right now. It's been so important this year, and it's been brewing for a while, and it offers a lot of possibilities for us as artists to potentially address some of the issues that we're talking about, but by no means is the technology perfect. There are a tremendous number of issues, and also, again, it's a nascent space. There's a lot of racism and sexism already that's begun to pop up in terms of the imagery and some of the things that are being created. And I think we have to be, very thoughtful about that as well. I think that, with NFTs, they're so disruptive, and leveraging crypto for art, it's so fantastic because we do have the opportunity to leave behind so much of the racism and sexism that we had in the institutional art world. And so it's an opportunity to start a whole new chapter, but it just doesn't happen by default. It doesn't happen without concerted, tireless, and passionate effort on our parts to lead this in the right direction. What do you think? I'll start with Dylan. What do you think about the NFT space right now? What are the, biggest thoughtful critiques that you would have for it right now in terms of with an eye to making it better and more robust and a stronger space to unleash our best creative selves?
So it's the NFT space. I find it amazing. I've been following that space since, I've been following crypto since Bitcoin was like 50 cents and Ethereum since it was a paper. So this is what I had hoped would come when I originally saw CryptoKitties drop. We have CryptoKitties about to drop on the Flow blockchain, with a blockchain that can actually sustain real-time crypto entertainment, interactive experiences, gaming. I'm looking forward to that to intersect with XR. But I think the issues in a greater spectrum that go beyond empowering individual artists, which I'm a big fan of empowering the living artist, making sure that an individual can actually be able to keep the power on and keep food on the table. So I love those aspects of everything that's going on now. And the social attacks that are going on around the artists that are making that choice, either because they want to or because they have to out of necessity. I'd really like to see a more compassion for the individual artists that, to be real, in many cases are incurring less of a carbon footprint for putting something out as an NFT in comparison to someone else that's doing like a t-shirt run or a run of physical sculptures or plastic toys produced in a factory under near slave situations there. So I number one, let's stop attacking the individual artists here. There are a couple belligerent individuals who are doing it almost as trolls. That's fine. But I think the larger issue to swing back and address, where I believe Miriam might have been going earlier to a degree, and where I think Drew was leading there, in that I'm more concerned about the institutions. I'm concerned that we've taken the previous layout, and we're going to basically say we just want Christie's in NFT space. We want the MoMA, we want every other gallery in this specific space. And in some cases where it's the MoMA, I'm totally fine with that. But in the case of an auction situation or a financial transaction situation where, let's be real, to a great degree, the art world is a mix of money laundering and a whole bunch of other things, tax havens, et cetera. It's those aspects that I would like to extract out. Because what's like the piggybacking on top of what is often in many cases a deceased artist, and being able to use that as the laundering mechanism to be able to pass that through a gallery chain based on handshakes. I just really would like the amount of capital that is earned from that type of scenario, at least a portion, if not all, if I can dream, to be able to go back to the artists, back to the curators, back to the individuals that are actually producing this. And we're in the first situation to where we can literally write those contracts. When we have a foundation or Super Rare or anyone else that is not writing their contracts to the benefit of the artists, that's a choice now. That's not just, we can't just chalk this up to products of the market. That's a thing we can avoid. So I really want to be able to see the individuals who are driving the market and the engineers working with them, designing contracts that are compassionate to the living human experience.
Yes, I think that that's going to be the next chapter. And right now, artists really are, for the most part, using a lot of smart contracts that are very cookie cutter and just based on these major platforms. Again, we see the things consolidating into the different platforms, but you can really only have the freedom around what you're creating and building, and kind of sovereignty over your own artistic identity if you're minting your own contract and just, you know, taking all of that under your own roof. Sophia, what are your thoughts about the NFT space? Like, what are the things that concern you the most, and what are the things that you think we need to do to make it better?
Okay, so where do I start? I'm gonna try to be as quick as possible. So first of all, I think that the NFT space has exposed a very huge societal bias, which is that we hold art to a very high moral standard. We hold artists to a very high moral standard, as artists aren't supposed to capitalize from the work, to make a living from their work. And we've also, I'm speaking for myself here, we've experienced bullying and criticism just for wanting to make a living from it. So just the fact that people are able to see that I sold a piece and that transaction is linked to carbon emission, that allows someone to publicly shame me for it. So I think this has shown that there is an issue here with artists or art being this thing that the artist should live their life as a tortured artist who never gets to earn anything for what they do, which is something I was already thinking about before, but NFTs kind of led me to confirm that maybe it's a confirmation bias. I don't know, but at least that's how I felt within that space. And there's been so much shame around after people started talking about the environmental impact of for example, the Ethereum protocols, that we've been really shamed for that. So I think that's a problem. And as Dylan mentioned, I think there are different ways of navigating the space. I'm not going to say that every platform is doing something right and that all NFTs are working in the way that I believe they should be working. I think there's a lot of work left to do, actually. And I think it's a good thing to start doing the work, especially in terms of representation. At least when I joined the NFT space, I didn't see much talk about inclusivity at all. And I started asking, where's the conversation about inclusivity here? Where's the representation? Who are all these people hiding behind all these names, and they're buying artworks from us, but we don't know who they are, what they're going to do with that artwork. And so it started opening, all these questions started to be brought forth, and I think that's a really important thing to take them in a constructive way. So yeah.
Thank you, Sophia. I'm going to next go to Miriam, and then we're going to move over to Hopin for the Q&A because it's 8:45 a.m. And I want to give this opportunity for the interactive portion of this session, but I want to give Miriam a chance to respond to this notion of NFTs and what we can do to make the space better.
So I'll be really quick so that we can, interact, as you said, on the other platform. But I'm not an expert at all. I'm reading right now a lot to make sure, I understand the NFTs from all angles. But I think that we have here an opportunity, like it's uncharted territories. So we can be the ones, like Dylan, you spoke about contract earlier. Like we can be the ones that are really laying the ground, for that NFTs are going the way we want it to go, and that artists are paid the way they should be paid. So I don't, as I said, I'm not an expert. I'm reading a lot, and I couldn't, but I see this as an opportunity and I think we should jump in and spear, run with the spear and go for it.
Okay, great. So we will see you in the Hopin platform now. All of us are going to move over there so that we can answer some questions.